everybody. It's great to see everybody here for our event, Katrina 20th Anniversary Action in the Face of Adversity, Recovery, Reform, and how it got done. It's I think for many of us in this audience, it's a bit surreal that it has been 2 decades, 20 years since Hurricane Katrina. A lot of it feels very immediate. The sights, the sounds, the smells, the emotion. It's still very raw. On the other hand, a couple weeks ago, I was interviewed by a reporter, and I asked her what her Katrina memories were, and she told me that she was 2 years old at the time of Katrina. Right, and so there's some line from Dazed and Confused or Fast Times at Ridgemont High that reminds me of. So let me talk about what the purpose of today's event is and how we hope it's different from the others and why it's so important that we have an audience here as well. There are a lot of events that are going on this week, of course. There are a lot of commemorations. There are a lot of very spiritual events, particularly this Friday. We're going to have those. What we wanted to do with this one is to be instructive and also to be inspirational. And we particularly wanted to, and we're just talking about this all, to record for posterity and really to pay it forward to future generations what we were able to get done as citizens in terms of the first panel as part of formal government organizations, and then in the second panel as citizens, civic leaders, business leaders, without any formal authority, but just with enormous, unforeseen responsibility. So we're going to start with our first panel here, and that's going to be happening in about 10 minutes. And then we're going to have the second panel around 3:15. There'll be an intermission in between, and we have snacks and coffee outside. You're just not allowed to bring them inside. Those are the rules of the ship. But before we do that, I wanted to bring up a special guest who has been a friend and a mentor to me for 20 years. He was on point when Katrina struck and helped turn this place into really Command Central. And so I'd love a big round of applause for former CEO of the Port of New Orleans, Gary LaGrange.
Thank you, Michael. Put on my water helmet. Michael said, Gary, you got 3 minutes to talk. I said, geez, it's like asking me to turn water into wine. Nevertheless, out of respect of our great panels that we have, and all of the good work that everybody's done out of the audience as well, I'll try to abide by that. This very room, I'm reminiscing now after the storm finally hit, was the home of the Los Angeles SWAT team, and it was also the home of the Arkansas National Guard. Out in the lobby where you just had coffee and water was a makeshift barbershop where everybody, first responders and anybody, could get their hair buffed down to James's type. Yeah, I was not as good as James. But nevertheless, it was something to behold. On this very day, August 26th, Friday afternoon, I walked out of an executive meeting with our chairman and some of the commissioners, and my executive assistant, Kyle Good, said, "We're in the cone." I said, "The cone? What the hell are you talking about?" She said, "Friday afternoon, 3 o'clock, we're in the cone." And right away, I realized what she meant, and immediately we went into phase 1, and then the next day, phase 2, Saturday and all day Sunday, prepared for it. As Matt Gresham and I talk about quite often, good to see you, Matt, again, we got to the point of where we realized, my God, we got the best preparation plan that a port could ever have for a hurricane. What we didn't have was a recovery plan, because nobody ever really thought one would hit. The best thing we could remember is '65 with Betsy, and that was, in distant memory. And So when it happened, probably going fast forward, I'm down to 1 minute. Fast forwarding it, we did a complete reconnaissance the entire day of the hurricane, watched it from the Hilton, watched the Hilton flood and windows blow out and sheets peel off the side of the building. We went out, Lieutenant Joe LaBarriere, Ted Knight, my chief operating officer, did a complete reconnaissance uptown, downtown, out at the Napoleon Avenue dock, and then down to France Road. And the real reality of it all hit when we got on the bridge and saw people coming out of trees and on their rooftops in the lower Ninth Ward in that area, and that's when the reality hit. And it wasn't an hour or two later, it was within 5 hours after the storm hit, that the President George Bush and Donald Rumsfeld gave me a phone call. I was lucky enough to have borrowed a phone from the Maritime Administration because ours were all out. It was on a Beaumont tower, and I remember the President, Donald Rumsfeld actually, the President was listening in and said, "What do you need?" Well, we had just come from the lower Ninth Ward. I said, "We need first aid supplies, blankets, we need food, we need water." And there was a long pause, and Rumsfeld said, "What do you really need?" And the light bulb went off. I said, "Well, we need the channel to reopen, we need the river to reopen, we need to clean it up, we need aids to navigation, we need to move forward, we need to open this port because it's a port of national significance." The President jumped in, he said, "Exactly, that's why we're calling you." 37 states and 3 Canadian provinces directly rely on the Port of New Orleans and its ability to move cargo for our economy. The global impact by Katrina, by closing the Port of New Orleans, was infinitesimal, couldn't be measured. So with that, the ball began to roll, and it was 4 days later, unfortunately, it was a war zone for 4 days. Eventually, I talked to somebody yesterday, we picked up 21 bodies off of the street and got them to the temporary morgue at the airport, and was able to march through it one day at a time, all in a reactionary mode. I remember telling my staff, 11 of our 65 police officers stayed, the rest evacuated with their families. And I remember telling them, do something. We don't have a recovery plan, but do something. Don't do nothing, do something. At least you got a 50% chance of doing the right thing. And we managed through it successfully with a lot of help. On the 4th day, of course, the airborne showed up, and we began to get military assistance with curfews. And the river got back to some degree, some element of sanity, and we were able to move forward with that. That said, a lot of good people, you're going to hear from all of them today, got super involved, hands-on. There were no such thing as 8-hour days or 12-hour days or even 18-hour days. It was hands-on 24/7 for about 3 or 4 months. And all I can say is thank you all, every one of you, for your interest, for your participation today, and for being here. And God knows, let's hope that never happens again. And that's where it all begins and ends right away. Praise to the Lord. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Gary. I also want to acknowledge one of our great partners who I think is in the back, and that is the current CEO of Port of New Orleans, Beth Branch, who is back there, who is leading the effort to develop the new Louisiana International Terminal in St. Bernard, arguably the most important infrastructure project in America at this time. So thank you, Beth, for allowing us to use the space today. Appreciate you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce somebody who did it all back in Katrina. She's still doing the thing, as we say today, either here or up in New York. I'm talking about Kim Boyle, who was a member of the Louisiana Recovery Authority, the LRA, a member of the Bring Back New Orleans Commission, a member and participant in the United New Orleans Plan. She is a partner at Phelps Dunbar, and perhaps most importantly to me, she is my incoming board chair. here at Gino Inc. Big round of applause for the inimitable Kim Boyle.
Using a mic, guys. First of all, good afternoon. Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful introduction. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I think the theme for today is right on point. Action in the face of adversity. And those of us who were here during this time know what distressful, adverse circumstances we were going through. But we're also going to talk about what we can do or what we did do to really come up with a blueprint to help other municipalities, to help other cities that may have to deal with something really, really, really bad and not have a recovery plan in place, what they can do to bring their municipalities or their cities back. But I think in order to move forward, you really do have to look backwards at what was actually going on during that time period. Now, August 29, 2005, we know that this was unprecedented and the losses were remarkable. Almost 2,000 lives were lost. We had over 1 million housing units damaged or destroyed across the Gulf Coast. 1 million, those are numbers. Over $150 billion in property damage. That's a real number. Over 1.2 million people displaced from their homes. Now, those of you who were either not in New Orleans, had moved here, or too young to remember, they were actually referring to us, those of us who grew up in the city, who lived in the city, as we were displaced, the news media actually referred to us as refugees. So we were deemed to be refugees in our own country. That's how other parts of the country was looking at the city of New Orleans, the state of Louisiana, the state of Mississippi. So roads closed, schools closed, public facilities closed, destroyed. Medical services literally washed away. So if you had health issues, or if you were like me and had elderly parents with health issues, even when people were telling you, oh, come back, you couldn't do that in good conscience without knowing what the situation was going to be for your spouse, for your parent, for your loved one who might need serious medical condition. Now, as Michael said, I am honored to serve on the GNO Inc. board, honored to serve with that phenomenal staff, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the economic damage that resulted as a result of Katrina. And Gary talked about this to some degree as it related to the port, but I'm going to be a little bit broader than Gary was. 81,000 businesses in 13 Louisiana parishes suffered business interruptions or damages. 81,000. 18,000 businesses destroyed. Now remember, in Louisiana, we have a lot of small business. We have a lot of mom and pop businesses. Everything is not a Fortune 500. So you had businesses destroyed, unable to ever open again. You had 200,000 people that became unemployed. I cannot minimize the impact of that. So these were people who were working a full-time job on the Friday before, the Saturday before, the Sunday even before, but when this happens, they could not work, lost their job, had no idea what source of income they were going to have to care for their families. And remember, we're in New Orleans, so it's always about hospitality and tourism. You had 1,400 tourism and hospitality businesses shut down completely. No one could come here. No tourist industry whatsoever, no hospitality industry whatsoever, and over 33,000 employees lost their jobs. However, while these statistics are important, it's still important to kind of remember the big picture, the real human impact of what occurred. And that's important, particularly if you were not there. Michael made a joke about speaking to a young lady who was 2 years old, so she was probably like, what's Hurricane Katrina? But a lot of people, actually I'll say myself, many of us have kind of put a lot of this out of our minds, because bluntly it brings back PTSD. As I was preparing for this today and preparing for a reunion dinner that the LRA and the BNOB had on Saturday, I could feel myself getting emotional and riled up because this was bad. If you weren't here, this was bad. This was tragic. So we have this panel, and I'm going to give more introductions to this panel, but these were individuals who took this battle on heads on. They took it on and they said, we're not letting our region die, we're not letting our state die, we're not letting our city die. So you had Andy Copeland, who was working for Governor Blanco. She made him the first executive director, the founding executive director for the Louisiana Recovery Authority. And we're going to talk about the LRA because many people have mixed feelings about that. You had Alden McDonald, CEO of Liberty Bank. And with full disclosure, I am on the board of Liberty Bank. Liberty Bank was decimated. Now let me be clear. Liberty is the largest African-American owned bank in the country. Most of its customers are people of color. Many of the customers at Liberty Bank are small homeowners, small business owners, decimated as a result of this. Alden still, notwithstanding the fact that the bank was close to destroyed, he still took on being on the Bring New Orleans Back Commission. You had Tim Coulon. Tim Coulon may have had one of the most difficult jobs. He was head of the Louisiana Expedition Stadium District. So he had to deal with the destruction of the Superdome, but bluntly, he had to deal with Mr. Benson as the owner of the Saints. And he's going to talk about that a little bit during this panel discussion. You have Walt Leger, who I've known for many years, one of the preeminent attorneys in this city, in this state, with the Land Trust, became vice chair of the Louisiana Recovery Authority. But important for this discussion is Walt, who lived in St. Bernard Parish, lost his home in St. Bernard Parish. So he's trying to deal with that. And you had our superintendent, who many of you saw in the news, read about on national news, our superintendent, Doris Vautier, who was recognized by, you received what the profiles encourage from the Kennedys. She, I'm not going to say single-handedly because I don't believe in people doing things single-handedly. You always work with a team. But she had the leadership to know that with the businesses, with oil refinery plants, with what was going on in St. Bernard, you cannot ask employees to come back if their kids didn't have a school and their schools were completely destroyed. Now, one thing that's kind of been lost in the discussion recently relating to what was going on with the city and to some extent with the state with Katrina were some of the racial issues. At the time, those were big ticket items. We've kind of let those kind of go down a little bit over the last few years. But I want those of you who have some gray hair, like, well, my hair is purple, but if you have some gray hair, like me, and old enough to remember, you will recall President George Bush coming in September of 2005, cities almost completely empty. Literally the French Quarter, which we've never ever seen before in our lives. It looked like something from a horror movie. No one's there. No one's walking around. And if you remember, President Bush, right by the St. Louis Cathedral, he gave these remarks, and it's important to remember. He told the entire nation, and this was an address to the nation, that within the Gulf region are some of the most beautiful and historic places in America. As all of us saw on television, there are some deep persistent poverty in this region as well. That poverty has roots in a history of racial discrimination, which cut off generations from the opportunity of America. This is President Bush speaking. We have a duty to confront this poverty with bold action. So let us restore all that we have cherished from yesterday, and let us rise able to confront the legacy of inequality. Now, I think it's pretty significant that the Republican President of the United States chose that opportunity to discuss actually what some of the problems were and remain in this region, which include dealing with racial inequity. That has kind of lost some of its momentum or some of the conversation as we moved on. So, what was the action in the face of adversity? First of all, this panel, experts, each and every one of them, they're going to discuss what did government do. One of the questions I also want them to address is, what should government do? If you pay any attention to the news these days, if you watch, whether you watch CNN, whether you watch Fox, whether you watch MSNBC, you know that there are a lot of questions about whether government actually has an obligation. When disasters of this nature happen, does government have an obligation to step in and try to take care and help its citizens who cannot help themselves? And different people have different positions on that. I don't know if there, well, I do think there's a right answer. I was about to say, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think there's a right answer, but we can discuss it. No, exactly. What did organizations do? What did other organizations do? What did the faith-based community do? What bold actions were taken? So I want these guys to discuss how did public, private, grassroots leadership lay the foundation for a stronger, more protected region. And I want them to discuss, is our region stronger? Do we believe that it's better protected than it was before? Now, we talk about a lot of reforms taking place. Have those reforms been lasting? Were all of those reforms important? Should other reforms have taken place? Now, I don't want us to lose sight of, and I think we have lost sight when we're talking about this 20th anniversary of Katrina, about people, to Gary's point, who were literally boots on the ground. As I said, we had a little mini reunion dinner of those of us that were involved with the Louisiana Recovery Authority, the Bring New Orleans Back Commission, etc. Staff as well as the board members. But I was on a plane to New York on Sunday, and sitting behind me was a good friend, I won't say her name, retired from the city of New Orleans as a director of one of the departments, worked at the city, I think, more than 30 years. Very dedicated city employee. She said, Kim, you know what's never talked about anymore? Those of us who were boots on the ground who stayed here because we worked for the city of New Orleans. Those of us who couldn't leave. Our families were able to evacuate. They were worried about us. We stayed here. She said, not one person has called me. Not one person has recognized what we did during that time period. They feel that we haven't thanked them. And to some extent, they're probably right. Because these are people that were soldiers on the field. They were doing their job, doing it well, and we haven't really recognized that. So that's something else that hopefully we have time to discuss. So in ending, before we get to the panel discussion, I'm always, well, Michael talked about the nonpartisan effort. And I do think it is important, particularly these days, in the year 2025, to talk about a group of people, regardless of whether they tag the R, whether they tag the D, whether they tag the I, or they don't tag any party affiliation whatsoever, who said, you know what? That doesn't matter. This is about recovery. This is about bringing our region back. This is about bringing our state back. This is about bringing our city back. This is about the people, the phenomenal people in New Orleans, in Louisiana, in St. Bernard, in Jefferson Parish. This is about them. So party affiliation does not count. And I want us to remember that the governor at the time, Democratic governor, first and only female governor of the state of Louisiana, she appointed the most bipartisan and to some extent transparent board possible. It doesn't get any better than when you appoint Dr. Norman C. Francis, the 47-year president of Xavier University, as the chair of your board, because he was the only person who could have brought the level of credibility and trust to make everyone understand that we were going to do this right. There was concern in Washington, which Andy and Tim and Walt will talk about, that with our history, there's going to be corruption. We're going to be stealing money. The money's not going to go to the people it's supposed to go to. When you appoint Dr. Francis to anything, you know that's never going to happen. So you look at the people that were appointed to that board. But you also look at, and I want Mr. McDonald to address this, he and I served on the Bring New Orleans Back Commission. This was the commission appointed by the mayor of the city of New Orleans to focus on and address the issues directly relevant to this city. Now, many people ask, why did the city need its own commission if we had the Louisiana Recovery Authority? They're working on all this. They're addressing all of this. But bottom line is the devastation was so broad, it was so immediate that we also needed to be able to address things specifically related to the city of New Orleans. I ended up becoming chair of the healthcare committee for the Bring New Orleans Back Commission, and many people said, Kim, you don't do healthcare law. How in the world do you have any expertise whatsoever in being chair? I said, I don't. I made the mistake of raising my hand. We all know how that goes. We all know how that goes. When you raise your hand in a meeting, they were trying to figure out what committees to have. We're going to do government reform. We're going to do culture. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Again, I had parents in their 70s. They're in Texas. I'm driving in every week for these meetings. So I said, well, what about health care? No one had brought it up. So the mayor said, yeah, great, Kim, great question. You're going to chair that. Well, I always take the position I'm going to be up for the challenge no matter what. I brought in people who were experts. I'm not an expert. I wasn't an expert. But I brought the people who were experts to help us address how are we going to recover health care services in this city. So was the work done by the LRA perfect? Was the work done by Bring New Orleans Back Commission perfect? Absolutely not. Are there legitimate criticisms about some of the decisions that were made? Yes, there are. We're human beings. We were trying to do something when there was no blueprint whatsoever to doing this. It is easy now to look back in hindsight and say, you should have done this, you should have done that, you should have done that. All that's great, but it's like playing the fifth quarter of a Saints game. Bottom line is, we were operating in that time period, in the immediacy of that time period, but at all times trying to do the right thing for everybody. And we didn't always get it right, but we tried our best to do so. So I'll end with a quote from one of my heroes, the iconic late Congressman John Lewis. And I think this quote is very appropriate. He said, ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes. And each one of us in every generation must do our part. These men and women did their part. thousands of men and women did their part. We have an obligation to still do our part to make this region better, to make this state better, to make the city of New Orleans better. So we're going to discuss right now, how do we do that? Thank you.